This is crazy HOA life. The HOA made it personal, and I made it documented. I opened my door to a stack of notices, rubber banded together, and sitting on my welcome mat, and before I could even pick them up, I heard the voice from the sidewalk. Stephanie Wilson, the Welcome Committee Chair for Fairview Commons Association, stood next to my car with a megaphone held up like she was directing traffic at a disaster site, and she shouted loud enough that I felt it in my chest. The rules do not care about your excuses. She pointed at my front tire, where a bright orange windshield sticker that said violation without readable details was already plastered across my driver's side glass, and next to her a guy in a high-vis vest was crouching with a tire clamp in his gloved hands. I froze on my doorstep in my red polo shirt with the hood up and my car key fob clenched in my fist, trying to understand what was happening, and Stephanie kept shouting through the megaphone even though I was 10 feet away. You ignored the final warning, and now it is tow day. I work as an apartment maintenance supervisor in Birmingham, Alabama, and I have seen every kind of complaint a tenant can dream up. But this was different. This was my own car, parked in my assigned spot in front of my townhouse in a neighborhood where the mailbox cluster is the unofficial courtroom, and Stephanie was acting like I had committed a felony. The tow guy clicked the clamp halfway shut on my wheel and stood up, waiting for her signal, and I could see the tow truck idling at the curb with its amber lights flashing in the early morning dampness. I am on call for work, and I cannot have my vehicle immobilized or towed. I said it loud enough that the tow driver looked up, and Stephanie lowered the megaphone just enough to respond in her normal voice, which somehow felt worse. You signed the covenants, now you live the covenants. She said it like a mantra, and I could tell she had been practicing. She pulled a folded paper from her blazer pocket and waved it at me without letting me take it. This is your third notice for parking without a valid guest decal, and the board authorized immediate tow action. I do not have guests, I said. That is my car, in my assigned spot. Stephanie smiled, and it was the kind of smile that makes you check your back pocket for your wallet. Your assigned spot requires a resident permit decal on the windshield, visible from outside. You have not displayed one since you moved in 3 weeks ago. That makes this an unauthorized vehicle. I glanced at my windshield and saw the orange sticker covering most of the glass, but I did not see any decal anywhere. I had never been told I needed one. The leasing office gave me a parking spot number and a key fob for the gate, and that was it. I started to say that, but Stephanie cut me off. Ignorance is not an excuse. She raised the megaphone again. The Covenant Section 12.4 clearly states all resident vehicles must display current decals issued by the HOA office during business hours on weekdays only. You have been here 21 days and you have not come in once. The tow driver clicked the clamp the rest of the way shut and stood up, brushing his gloves together. He looked at Stephanie and said, "All set," and she nodded like a judge passing sentence. I felt my stomach drop. I was in the middle of a renovation schedule for a property downtown, and delays could cost me thousands if I missed the inspection window tomorrow morning. Wait, I said, louder this time. I am calling the leasing office right now. This is insane. Stephanie checked her watch. The office opens at 9. It is 7:45. By the time they answer, your car will be at the impound lot on Highway 78, and you will owe $430 in tow and storage fees, plus a $50 release processing fee from the HOA. I pulled out my phone and started dialing anyway, and Stephanie stepped closer, lowering the megaphone so it hung at her side like a weapon. I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink. She said it with the kind of casual confidence that told me she had done this before, probably a lot, and she expected me to fold. The tow driver climbed into his truck and started backing it toward my car, the amber lights sweeping across the wet asphalt and catching the morning fog. I stayed calm, because I had one piece of proof that would end the whole game. I did not tell Stephanie what it was yet. I just stood there with my phone to my ear, listening to the leasing office voicemail greeting, and I watched the tow truck reverse until the wheel lift was inches from my rear bumper. Stephanie tilted her head and looked at me like I was a puzzle she was solving. "You are not panicking. Why are you not panicking?" "Because this is illegal," I said. "And you know it." She laughed, a short bark that echoed off the townhouse walls. "Illegal. You think you can scare me with that word? I have been running this welcome committee for 6 years, and I have never lost a single tow appeal. The board backs me 100%. The tow driver hopped out and started connecting the lift straps to my rear axle, and I realized I had maybe 2 minutes before my car was off the ground. I left a voicemail for the leasing office and hung up, then opened my email app and started scrolling. Stephanie watched me with her arms crossed, the megaphone dangling from one hand. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "Of what?" "That you do not have the authority to order this tow." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then came back even wider. "I have blanket authorization from the board. Every single tow I order is pre-approved under the Emergency Enforcement Clause." I found the email I was looking for and turned my phone screen toward her. It was from the property management company, dated 2 days before I moved in, confirming that the HOA had switched to a new decal system, but the vendor had not delivered the decals yet, so enforcement would be suspended until further notice. The email was addressed to all residents and copied to the board. Stephanie glanced at the screen, then looked away like it was nothing. "That is outdated. We resumed enforcement last week." "Then show me the notice," I said. "Show me anything from the board or the management company that says enforcement resumed." She did not move. The tow driver looked up from the straps and said, "Ma'am, I need confirmation before I lift. Do you have the paperwork?" Stephanie turned to him and raised the megaphone again, which was absurd because he was 5 feet away. "I have blanket authorization. This vehicle is in violation of Covenant Section 12.4. Proceed." The driver shook his head. "I need a signed tow authorization form with the violation code and the board seal. House rules. If I lift without it and the owner disputes, the company eats the cost." Stephanie stared at him, and I could see her jaw tighten. "I will email it to you in 5 minutes. "I need it now," the driver said. "Or I unhook and leave." Stephanie turned back to me, and her face was red now. The kind of red that comes from realizing you are losing control. You think you are clever. You think you can stall. "But I will have that paperwork in my hand before you finish your coffee, and when I do, I will make sure every single violation you have ever committed in this community is documented and fined." I just looked at her. "I have been here 3 weeks. What violations?" She pointed at my front door. "Your trash bin was on the curb past 8 p.m. last Wednesday. That is a $50 fine. Your porch light was out for 2 days last week. That is another $50. And you parked in the fire lane for 11 minutes when you were unloading furniture." "I was unloading," I said. "There is no other way to get a couch up the stairs." "The fire lane is sacrosanct." She said it like she was quoting scripture. "You will receive all 3 citations by certified mail within 72 hours. The tow driver finished unhooking the straps and climbed back into his truck. He leaned out the window and said to me, "If she gets the paperwork, call the company and dispute it before I come back. You have my card." He handed me a business card with a company logo and a phone number, and I took it. Stephanie watched the truck pull away, and for a moment she just stood there in the street with the megaphone hanging at her side, breathing hard. Then she turned and walked toward the clubhouse at the far end of the parking lot, and I heard her muttering something about emergency board meetings and compliance violations. I went back inside and sat down at my kitchen table with my phone and my laptop. I had 2 hours before I needed to leave for work, and I spent the first 30 minutes forwarding the property management email to my personal account, screenshotting the leasing documents that showed my assigned parking spot, and digging through the HOA covenant packet the leasing office had given me on a Ovin day. I found section 12.4, and it did say resident vehicles needed decals, but there was a footnote that said enforcement would follow the procedures outlined in the management company agreement. I opened the management company agreement, which was a 20-page PDF, and I scrolled to the enforcement section. It said the HOA could issue notices and fines, but all towing actions required written authorization signed by at least 2 board members and submitted to the tow company within 24 hours of the alleged violation. It also said residents had a 72-hour grace period to cure any parking violation before a tow could be ordered. I had been here 21 days. If Stephanie had really sent me 3 notices, they would have been dated at least a week apart, which meant the earliest she could legally order a tow was today. But she had also admitted the decal vendor had not delivered the decals yet, which meant there was no physical way for me to comply even if I wanted to. I called the property management company and got through to a compliance officer named Martin, who listened to my story and then sighed like he had heard it 1,000 times before. "Stephanie Wilson," he said. "Yeah, she has been a problem for about a year now. The board loves her because she keeps the community looking pristine, but she bends the rules so far they snap." "Can she order a tow without the signed authorization?" I asked. "No, and if she did, the tow company is liable, not the HOA. That is why most drivers will not touch a disputed vehicle without ironclad paperwork." "What about the notices she claims she sent me?" Martin clicked his keyboard for a moment. "I am looking at the HOA violation log right now. There is nothing under your address. No notices, no warnings, no fines. She is bluffing." "Can you send me a copy of that log?" I asked. "Already done. Check your email." I refreshed my inbox and saw the email from Martin with an attached spreadsheet. I opened it and confirmed what he had said. My address was completely clean. I saved the file and thanked him, then hung up and stared at the orange sticker still stuck to my windshield outside. I went outside and peeled the sticker off, which left a sticky residue but no permanent damage. Then I picked up the stack of notices Stephanie had left on my mat and flipped through them. There were 5 pages total, all printed on Fairview Commons Association letterhead, and they were all dated the same day, this morning. The first one said I had violated section 12.4 by parking without a decal. The second one said I had violated section 9.2 by leaving my trash bin out past 8 p.m. The third one said I had violated section 14.6 by parking in the fire lane. The fourth one said I had accumulated $150 in fines. The fifth one said my vehicle was subject to immediate towing. All 5 pages were signed by Stephanie Wilson, Welcome Committee Chair, and none of them had a second signature. I took photos of every page, then went back inside and forwarded them to Martin with a note. "These were left on my door this morning. Do they count as official notices?" Martin replied in under a minute, "No. Official notices must be sent by certified mail or hand-delivered with a witness signature. These are intimidation tactics." I felt a flicker of relief, but it did not last long. At 8:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Gate access suspended pending compliance review. Contact HOA office to resolve." I tried my key fob on the gate and got a red light. I tried again and got the same result. I called Martin back and told him what happened. "That is retaliation," he said, "and it is illegal. I will call the gate vendor and get you reinstated, but it might take a few hours. In the meantime, document everything. I hung up and looked at the gate, which was the only way in or out of the community, unless you wanted to climb a 6-foot fence. I had a work call in an hour, and I needed to be on site by noon, and now I was trapped. I walked back to my townhouse and saw Stephanie standing on the clubhouse exterior walkway with another woman who I recognized as the property manager, a tall blonde in a gray suit who always had a forced smile like she was posing for a realtor ad. Stephanie pointed at me and said something I could not hear, and the property manager nodded and started walking toward me. I waited on my doorstep, arms crossed, and when she got close enough, she extended her hand and said, "Hi, I am Diane. We met briefly when you moved in." "I remember," I said. I did not shake her hand. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmares and satisfying karma moments. Diane dropped her hand and adjusted her blazer. "I understand there has been some confusion about parking enforcement, and I want to clear it up. Stephanie has brought to my attention that you have not picked up your resident decal, and that has caused some issues." "I have not picked it up because it does not exist," I said. "Martin told me the vendor has not delivered them yet." Diane blinked. "Martin said that?" "Yes, and he also told me Stephanie has no authority to order a tow without a signed authorization form from 2 board members." Diane glanced back at Stephanie, who was now standing at the top of the clubhouse stairs with her arms crossed and the megaphone in one hand like a scepter. Diane turned back to me and lowered her voice. "Look, Stephanie can be a little overzealous, but she is trying to keep the community safe. If you just work with her, this will all go away." "I do not need it to go away," I said. "I need her to follow the rules she keeps quoting at me." Diane smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "The board has given Stephanie a lot of discretion in enforcement matters. If you want to dispute a violation, you will need to submit a formal appeal in writing and wait for the next board meeting, which is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I said. Yes. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you comply with any notices you receive. I heard footsteps behind Diane and looked up to see Stephanie walking toward us, the megaphone swinging at her side. She stopped next to Diane and said, "Is he going to cooperate?" "He is going to submit an appeal," Diane said carefully. Stephanie laughed. "An appeal. Good luck with that. The board has never overturned one of my enforcement actions. Not once." I looked at Diane. "Is that true?" Diane hesitated, then nodded. "The board trusts Stephanie's judgment." "Even when she violates the management agreement?" I asked. Diane stiffened. "Excuse me." I pulled out my phone and opened the email from Martin with the management agreement highlighted. It says here that all towing actions require written authorization signed by at least 2 board members. Stephanie tried to tow my car this morning with no authorization and no second signature. That is a breach of contract. Stephanie stepped forward and jabbed a finger at my phone. That document is outdated. The board amended the enforcement procedures at the last meeting. "Show me the amendment," I said. She did not respond. Diane looked between us and said, "I think we all need to take a step back and approach this calmly. I will review the enforcement procedures and get back to you both within 48 hours. 48 hours, I said. "My gate access is suspended right now. I cannot leave." Diane frowned. "Your gate access is suspended." "Ask Stephanie," I said. Diane turned to Stephanie, who shrugged. "He is non-compliant. The system flagged him automatically." "That is not how the system works," Diane said slowly. "Gate access is managed by the vendor, not by the HOA office." Stephanie crossed her arms. "I called the vendor this morning and requested a temporary suspension pending compliance review." Diane stared at her. You called the vendor? Yes. Without consulting me. I do not need to consult you, Stephanie said. I am the welcome committee chair. I have enforcement authority. Diane took a breath and turned to me. I will call the vendor and get your access reinstated within the hour. I apologize for the inconvenience. Stephanie opened her mouth to argue, but Diane held up a hand. We will discuss this later, she said to Stephanie. Then she walked back toward the clubhouse, pulling her phone from her pocket. Stephanie watched her go, then turned to me with a smile that was all teeth. You think you won something, she said. You did not. You just made this worse for yourself. How? I asked. Because now I have a reason to look at every single thing you do. Every light bulb. Every trash can. Every visitor. Every package. You are going to wish you had just picked up the decal and kept your mouth shut. You signed the covenants, now you live the covenants, I said, throwing her line back at her. Her smile vanished. She turned and walked back toward the clubhouse, and I watched her go, feeling a knot of tension in my chest that I knew was not going away anytime soon. I got my gate access back an hour later, and I drove to the worksite downtown, where I spent the next 6 hours running diagnostics on a failing HVAC system and trying not to think about Stephanie. But when I got home that evening, there was a new notice taped to my door. This one was on official HOA letterhead, and it said I had been fined $200 for verbal harassment of an HOA official during an enforcement action. It was signed by Stephanie Wilson and countersigned by someone named Greg Palmer, who I assumed was a board member. I took a photo of the notice and texted it to Martin. He called me back 5 minutes later and said, "This is escalating. You need to document everything and consider getting a lawyer." A lawyer, I said, for an HOA parking dispute. It is not about parking anymore, Martin said. Stephanie is trying to build a case to put a lien on your property. If she can stack enough fines, she can file a claim and force a sale to cover the debt. Can she do that? I asked. Technically, yes. If the fines are upheld by the board and you do not pay them, the HOA can file a lien. But she has to follow the procedures, and based on what I am seeing, she is cutting corners everywhere. What do I do? I asked. You fight back, Martin said. File a formal complaint with the board. Request a hearing. Bring your evidence. And if they rule against you, take it to small claims court. The HOA has insurance, but they hate going to court because it costs them money even if they win. I hung up and sat down on my couch, staring at the notice. I had been in this community for less than a month, and I was already looking at $450 in fines, a potential lien, and a welcome committee chair who had it out for me. I thought about my job and my schedule and the renovation deadline I was racing to meet, and I realized I did not have time for this. But I also realized I did not have a choice. The next morning, I drove to the HOA office, which was a small converted garage next to the clubhouse. Stephanie was behind the desk, typing on a laptop, and when I walked in, she looked up and smiled like she had been expecting me. Here to pick up your decal, she asked. Here to file a formal complaint, I said. Her smile widened. Against who? You. She leaned back in her chair and folded her hands in her lap. On what grounds? Harassment, retaliation, and breach of the management agreement. She laughed. Good luck with that. The board meets in 2 weeks, and you will need to submit your complaint in writing with supporting documentation at least 7 days in advance. That gives you about a week to put together a case, which I assume you will spend working instead, because you are on call, right? I did not respond. She opened a drawer and pulled out a form which she slid across the desk. Fill this out. Include every single detail. I will make sure the board sees it. I took the form and left. I spent the next 3 days writing a 5-page complaint that outlined every violation Stephanie had committed, every rule she had bent, and every procedural error she had made. I attached the email from Martin, the violation log, the unsigned notices, the photos of the orange sticker, and the text about the gate suspension. I submitted it to the HOA office by certified mail, and I kept a copy for myself. 2 days before the board meeting, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I answered and heard a calm male voice say, "This is Greg Palmer, president of the Fairview Commons Board." I wanted to reach out before the meeting and see if we can resolve this without a formal hearing. "I am listening," I said. "Stephanie told me there has been some tension between you two, and I think a lot of it comes from miscommunication. If you are willing to pay the fines and agree to follow the parking rules going forward, we can drop the harassment charge and move on." "I am not paying fines for violations I did not commit," I said. Greg sighed. "Look, I get it. You are new here, and Stephanie can be intense. But she is really good at what she does, and the board supports her. If you push this to a hearing, you are going to lose." "Then I will take it to small claims court," I said. "That is your right," Greg said, "but it is going to cost you a lot more than $450, and you are going to lose there too. The HOA has a lawyer on retainer." I hung up and stared at my phone. I felt like I was running out of options, but I also felt like I was getting close to something. Stephanie had made a mistake somewhere, and I just needed to find it. That night I went through every email, every notice, and every document I had collected, and I focused on the tow attempt. The tow driver had said he needed a signed tow authorization form with the violation code and the board seal, and Stephanie had said she would email it to him. But she had never sent it, which meant she had been bluffing. I pulled up the business card the tow driver had given me and called the number. A woman answered and said, "ABC Towing. How can I help you?" "Hi," I said. "I need to verify whether a tow order was submitted for my vehicle. The driver came out this morning, but did not complete the tow." "What is the address?" she asked. I gave her my address, and I heard her typing. She said, "I see the dispatch log. The driver went out at 7:50 a.m. and canceled the job at 8:15 because the authorization paperwork was not provided." "Do you have a record of who requested the tow?" I asked. "Let me check." She paused. "Yeah, it was called in by Stephanie Wilson from the Fairview Commons HOA. She said it was an emergency tow under a blanket authorization agreement." "Do you have that agreement on file?" I asked. Another pause. "No. We do not have any active agreement with Fairview Commons. We used to, but it expired about 6 months ago and was never renewed." I felt my pulse quicken. "Can you send me a copy of the dispatch log and a statement confirming there is no active agreement?" "I can email you the log," she said. "For the agreement status, you will need to request that in writing." I gave her my email and hung up. 10 minutes later, I had the dispatch log in my inbox, and it showed exactly what the woman had said. Stephanie had called in the tow, claimed blanket authorization, and the driver had canceled when the paperwork was not provided. I saved the file and added it to my evidence folder. The board meeting was held in the clubhouse community room on a Thursday night at 7. I arrived at 6:45 and found a seat near the back. The room was small, with folding chairs arranged in rows and a long table at the front where the board members sat. Greg Palmer was in the center, flanked by 2 other board members I did not recognize. Stephanie sat to the side in a chair labeled "Welcome Committee Chair," and she had a stack of folders in front of her. The meeting started with routine business, budget reports, landscaping updates, pool maintenance schedules. I sat through 20 minutes of procedural monotony before Greg finally said, "Next item is a formal complaint filed by a resident regarding enforcement actions." I will ask the resident to come forward and present his case. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I had printed copies of my complaint and all my evidence, and I handed a set to each board member. Then I turned to face the room and started talking. I moved into Fairview Commons 3 weeks ago, I said. On my first morning here, Stephanie Wilson attempted to have my car towed without providing the required authorization paperwork, without issuing any prior notices, and without following the procedures outlined in the management agreement. Since then, she has issued multiple fines for alleged violations that do not appear in the HOA violation log, suspended my gate access without authorization, and filed a harassment charge in retaliation for my complaint. Stephanie stood up. That is a lie. I have followed every procedure to the letter. I ignored her and kept talking. I have evidence that Stephanie called a tow company and requested an emergency tow under a blanket authorization agreement that does not exist. I have an email from the property management company confirming that no notices were issued to my address. I have a copy of the management agreement showing that Stephanie violated multiple enforcement procedures. And I have a dispatch log from the tow company confirming that she lied about having authorization. I handed Greg the dispatch log and the email from Martin. He read them in silence, then looked at Stephanie. Do you have a response? Stephanie picked up one of her folders and flipped it open. The resident has been non-compliant from day one. He parked without a decal. He left his trash bin out past the allowed time. He parked in the fire lane. He has been verbally abusive to me on multiple occasions. Do you have documentation? Greg asked. Stephanie hesitated. The documentation is in process. In process, Greg said. Yes. So you do not have it now. Stephanie closed the folder. I have been doing this job for 6 years, and I have never had a complaint upheld against me. If you side with him, you are going to open the door to every rule breaker in this community, questioning my authority. Greg looked at the other board members, then back at me. Do you have anything else to add? I do, I said. I have one more piece of evidence. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. A few days ago, I had called the tow company back and asked if they kept recordings of dispatch calls. They did not, but they did keep notes, and the dispatcher had read me the notes from Stephanie's call. I had recorded the conversation. I played the recording. The dispatcher voice came through clearly. Caller identified herself as Stephanie Wilson, Fairview Commons HOA. She requested immediate tow for a vehicle at the address, claimed blanket authorization, and said the owner had been warned multiple times. When the driver asked for paperwork, she said she would email it, but never did. Driver canceled the job and logged it as unauthorized tow attempt. I stopped the playback and looked at Greg. Stephanie ordered a tow without authorization, lied to the tow company, and then tried to cover it up by issuing retroactive notices that were never sent. Stephanie's face turned red. That recording is inadmissible. You do not have permission to record me. I did not record you, I said. I recorded a conversation with the tow company dispatcher, who was reading from the dispatch notes. That is public record. Greg looked at Stephanie, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He did not want to side with me, but he also did not want the liability of defending Stephanie if this went to court. I think we need to take a recess and discuss this in executive session, Greg said. The board members stood up and filed into a back room, and I sat down in the front row. Stephanie stayed in her chair, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had just keyed her car. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. 10 minutes later, the board came back. Greg sat down and said, after reviewing the evidence, the board has decided to rescind all fines issued to the resident and to reinstate his gate access immediately. We are also issuing a written warning to Stephanie Wilson for failure to follow proper enforcement procedures. Stephanie stood up, her face pale. A written warning. That is it. Greg nodded. That is it. I could see Stephanie jaw tighten, and for a moment I thought she was going to argue, but instead she grabbed her folders and walked out of the room without another word. The door slammed behind her, and the sound echoed through the clubhouse. Greg turned to me. I apologize for the inconvenience. If you have any further issues, please contact me directly. I nodded and left. As I walked to my car, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was not a total victory, but it was enough. I had stood my ground, I had fought back, and I had won. But I also knew this was not over. Stephanie was not the type to let things go, and the board had only given her a warning, not removed her. I would have to stay vigilant, document everything, and be ready for round 2. Over the next few weeks, things were quiet. I did not see Stephanie around the community, and I did not receive any new notices. I picked up my resident decal when the vendor finally delivered them, and I stuck it on my windshield. I paid my HOA dues on time, kept my trash bin off the curb, and made sure my porch light was always working. But then, about a month after the board meeting, I got a call from a contractor I had hired to install new flooring in one of my rental properties downtown. He said he had arrived at the property to find photos of his truck and equipment posted on a neighborhood Facebook group with a caption that said, "Unlicensed contractor working in Fairview Commons. Report to HOA immediately." I asked him to send me the screenshots, and when I saw them, I recognized the angle. The photos had been taken from the clubhouse parking lot, and they showed my contractor truck parked in front of my townhouse. The timestamp was from 2 days ago, during a visit when he had dropped off samples. I called Martin and told him what happened. He sighed and said, "Stephanie again." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because she is the admin of that Facebook group, and because this is exactly the kind of thing she does when she feels like she is losing control." "Can she do that?" I asked. "Post photos of someone's truck online without permission? Probably not. But proving it was malicious is going to be hard." I hung up and thought about my options. I could file another complaint, but that would take weeks and probably would not go anywhere. Or I could handle it myself. I chose the second option. I sent a message to the Facebook group admin asking for the post to be removed because it contained false information. Stephanie responded within an hour. "The post will remain up until the contractor provides proof of licensing and insurance." I replied with a PDF of the contractor license and insurance certificate, both of which were current and valid. Stephanie did not respond, but the post stayed up. The next day, I got a call from the contractor. He said someone had called the city licensing board and filed a complaint against him, claiming he was operating without a permit. The board had opened an investigation, and he was now required to provide documentation for every job he had worked in the past year. I knew it was Stephanie, but I also knew I could not prove it. So I did something I had been avoiding since the beginning. I hired a lawyer. The lawyer name was Rachel Kim, and she specialized in HOA disputes. I met with her in her office downtown and showed her everything: the notices, the emails, the dispatch log, the recording, the Facebook post, the licensing complaint. She listened without interrupting, then leaned back in her chair and said, "You have a strong case for harassment and defamation. If you want to go after her personally, we can file a civil suit. If you want to go after the HOA, we can file a claim for breach of contract and seek damages." "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Both," she said. "File the civil suit against Stephanie to put her on notice, and file the claim against the HOA to force them to take action. The HOA has insurance, and their carrier will pressure them to settle rather than go to trial." "How much will this cost?" I asked. "About $5,000 up front, plus a percentage of any settlement or judgment. But if we win, The HOA will be ordered to pay your legal fees." I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Let us do it." Rachel filed the paperwork the following week, and within 10 days, Stephanie and the HOA were both served. I did not hear anything for a while, and then I got a call from Greg Palmer. He sounded tired. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "Because Stephanie would not stop," I said, "and because the board did nothing. We gave her a warning." A warning is not enough when someone is costing people their livelihoods. Greg was silent for a moment. "What do you want?" "I want a refund of fees that hits the ledger like a slap, a public apology from the board, and Stephanie removed from the welcome committee." "I will see what I can do," Greg said. 2 weeks later, I got a settlement offer. The HOA agreed to refund all fees I had paid since moving in, issue a public statement clarifying that I had been wrongly fined, and reassign Stephanie to a non-enforcement role. In exchange, I agreed to drop the civil suit against Stephanie and the claim against the HOA. I accepted the offer, and Rachel finalized the paperwork. The refund check arrived a week later, and I deposited it with a sense of grim satisfaction. Stephanie was reassigned to the newsletter committee, which meant she no longer had any authority to issue fines or order tows. I did not see her around the community much after that, and when I did, she avoided eye contact. A few months later, I ran into Diane, the property manager at the mailbox cluster. She gave me her forced smile and said, "I heard you and the HOA worked things out." "We did," I said. "Good." Stephanie was a little overzealous, but I think she learned her lesson. I did not respond. I just took my mail and walked back to my townhouse, feeling like I had finally closed the chapter on the worst HOA experience of my life. But the real karma moment came a few weeks later when I got a call from Martin. He said the board had held an emergency meeting and voted to terminate their contract with Stephanie entirely. The reason, he said, was that another resident had come forward with a recording of Stephanie threatening to bury him in notices until he ran out of printer ink, and the board realized that if they did not act, they would face more lawsuits. I laughed when I heard that. Stephanie had repeated the exact same threat she had used on me, and this time, someone had recorded it. Her own words had become the evidence that ended her reign. In the end, the HOA lost in small claims court when another resident sued over a similar towing issue, and the judge ordered them to pay costs and implement a neutral towing process overseen by the property management company. Stephanie got a written warning for harassment behavior, which was later upgraded to a permanent ban from holding any HOA leadership position. As for me, I kept living in Fairview Commons, and I made sure to follow every rule to the letter. Not because I was afraid of Stephanie, but because I knew that the best revenge was to give them nothing to complain about. I hope you have a great day.